Good afternoon.
There you go.
Okay. Good afternoon. We're going to get started in this session, creating a learning community for minority nursing student success. My co-presenters are Dr. Lee and Dr. Bowie, and I am Dr. Dappermont. So I'm going to give you a little information about my co-presenters. Dr. Lee is the first African-American Dean of the Mary Black School of Nursing in South Carolina, upstate. Prior to that, she was the Associate Dean for Nursing and Academic Programs at the Laurinburg College of Nursing. She has been selected as Outstanding Alumni at UT Health Science Center, and she has published many research manuscripts and presented at many conferences. My other co-presenter, Dr. Bowie, is the Department Chair for Southwest Tennessee Community College. She's been there since 2016. She has held many leadership positions in nursing. Dr. Bowie is the founder of SLB Consulting, which inspires to positively impact the outcome of residents in long-term care facilities. And I am Dr. Jill Dappermont, professor and director of the RN to BSN program at the Laurinburg College of Nursing. I have been in academia for 26 years, and I've been at the Laurinburg College of Nursing for 14. Currently, I am the president-elect for the Faculty Senate at the University of Memphis. All right, so let's get started with the presentation. So our outcomes for this presentation is we will discuss how learning community can support minority students to be successful in nursing, understand why it's important for minorities to be part of the nursing workforce. We will identify ways to build a learning community, discover steps needed to recruit mentors, and describe how to keep minority students engaged. So, Dr. Lee will start with the minority gap.
Thank you, Dr. Dappermont. If you could go to the next slide for me. I want to start by talking to you guys a little bit about why we decided on this topic. Our project focused on 3 key areas for nursing students who were enrolled in associate degree programs. And those 3 key areas included degree completion, success on the National Council Licensure examination, which is also called NCLEX, and the third one was helping the students to transition to a baccalaureate degree program. The proportion of minority students who are enrolled in nursing degree programs is significantly low in comparison to whites. And as a CCNE accreditor who goes to different nursing programs across the nation, this mirrors just about every school that I've ever seen, with the exception of our historically Black colleges and universities. Students of color also trail behind white peers in post-secondary educational attainment. That's nationally as well as in Tennessee, which we can see, which was documented in our Complete Tennessee report for 2019. We all know that higher education is one of the best forms of social and economic mobility for anyone, including minorities. So it is extremely important that we help our students to be successful so that they can be successful in life overall. And in nursing, what we are seeing also is that minorities have a significantly higher failure rate on the National Council Licensure examination than whites, with some studies reporting African Americans as the lowest subgroup. What we're seeing when students are unsuccessful is that if they're unsuccessful on the first attempt, they often find themselves unsuccessful on repeated attempts. This can be due to many things. Most likely it's due to lower confidence and low self-esteem, because after they're unsuccessful the first time, they're just not quite sure and don't have the confidence that they need in order to continue to strive to reach success. Also, one thing we know is that diversity among student populations requires diversity among faculty to best support student success. In Tennessee, the representation of faculty of color does not reflect the demographics of the state's student population, which also contributes to fewer mentors with shared background for our students who need them and who have these experiences that they can relate to. And this was also noted in the Complete Tennessee report. Minority nursing students who don't have mentorship or have peers that they can see who are just like them can often feel lonely, isolated, and alienated. And all of these things can lead them to not being able to successfully complete the degree. Let's go to the next slide. So on the next slide, we will see that a report from the National Council State Board of Nursing. It's a national nursing workforce study that was completed in 2017. And in this workforce study, it shows that the nurses from minority backgrounds represent about 19.2% of the registered nursing workforce, and that 80% is of whites. And then when we look at the ratio there, we see that the minority nursing population in the workforce is fairly low. And so when we think about having a workforce that is representative of the population, by providing ethnic minorities with a nurse or a doctor from their own racial group, that speaks their primary language, this helps improve communication and trust and comfort for patients. And we see this with nursing and with healthcare and medical professions, but this is also something that can be experienced among many other professions, such as dentistry and the attorneys, and any area that you go into. Anytime you have someone that a person can relate to and who they can connect with, it definitely helps to form and establish trust. So greater diversity in healthcare increases trust in the entire medical system, and it also encourages more people to utilize healthcare resources. There was a groundbreaking report titled Missing Persons, Minorities in Health Professions. And this profession also identified this same factor. And it stated that this left many Americans feeling excluded from the healthcare system because they did not have individuals who they could relate to. Now let's take a look at the next slide. So what we strive to do in our project was create a learning community. A learning community is considered a high impact practice, and it provides a space and structure that's needed for students to align around a shared goal. So what we did was we connected people in two programs, an associate degree as well as a baccalaureate degree program that was eager to work together across boundaries. That's at Southwest Tennessee Community College in the University of Memphis. Our participants and project team were able to learn from one another to help achieve results that we couldn't have otherwise achieved alone. So by pairing a learning community with a structured mentoring program, the mentoring program put in support a mechanism that was helpful and useful in connecting students with the nursing role. And also it helped to provide an outlet for students to ask questions. And it also supported a positive experience by connecting students with a support system of individuals who could understand and relate to their challenges. And so this mentoring system was especially important when you look at the faculty diversity in the state of Tennessee, knowing that it's not reflective of our student population. So establishing its mentoring program can help to close that gap. In a study published in the Journal of Nursing Education and Practice, Georgia Southern University increased retention rates among minority nursing students from 69% to 95%, and also improved NCLEX pass rates from 84% to 100% using a minority mentoring program for students. And so by mirroring this process, we hope to achieve the same. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dackerman, and she'll talk a little bit about the steps that we use to build the learning community.
Before we move on, can you check and see if there's any questions in the chat box that we can answer before we go to the next slide?
I don't see any questions in the chat box so far.
No questions yet.
Dr. Boyd, did you look?
I did.
Okay,
no questions
good.
yet.
All right. So in the next slides, I'm going to talk about some of the steps used to build the learning community. So first of all, we decided to set up a criteria as to who could participate in the study and how we would target the population we were looking at. So we looked at underrepresented minority students, and that included Hispanic and Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. And this is like the lowest group of the nursing population, about 2.2 million nurses. Minorities make up 10%. It's a low number. So that's who was invited to participate in this study. Of those students, 30 underrepresented minority students were for the total population. We had two cohorts of 15 students, and the criteria that we set for them to participate was that they either had 2 or more C's in a class, at least 1 D, or they could have had an F in a course and failed a nursing course, or if they had to repeat a nursing course. So, or they could have been re-entering the nursing program after a stop out and had a GPA of 2.5. So those were the invited participants. The study took place in the 4th semester, which is the final semester of the nursing program at Southwest for the associate degree. So as Dr. Lee mentioned earlier, the partners were the University of Memphis and Southwest Community College. So the funds from this collaborative partnership grant was what we used, that was funded by TBR. And these monies were used to help outline how the program would be laid out. So incentives, we advertised the program for students who were maybe had repeat or met any of the criteria. And it was advertised that this program will help you be successful. We structured the program so that students, we provided meals for each session. Food is always a way to get people to come. You know, when you get out of class, you don't have to run and try to get a meal. So we made sure we provided meals after each session or during the session. We also provided incentives for the mentors who agreed to participate. The interesting thing about it was we didn't tell them that we were going to give them incentives after they volunteered, because we wanted people to volunteer who really had a heart to mentor students. And that is how we set up the incentive program. So we set a criteria for who could participate. The length of the program was only over a semester. So it was either August to December and then January to May. And the students participated up until graduation. So once they graduated, we just tracked the data. One of the things that interfered with the program was COVID-19 in March. So everything at that point went online, but the mentors were already in place, so they were able to reach out to students and connect with them and continue to follow up with them. Part of the volunteers in terms of the mentors, this was probably a difficult part, because initially we went to orientations where they had adjunct faculty. Adjunct faculty usually work and then they only teach part-time. And so I attended our adjunct faculty orientation to recruit volunteers. I initially had like 30 volunteers that said they wanted to participate. But upon contacting them for the follow-up, that dwindled down quick. And so it really, I went into pretty much a snowball process of trying to get people to volunteer to serve with these students. And that is how we proceeded. Our outcomes were 1, degree completion. And we were trying to decrease the completion gap for these underrepresented minorities in the program. And so that was one of the outcomes of this project. We also wanted to increase our first-time pass rate for minority students who participated in the program. And we kept that in mind and we identified those goals. We then wanted to have these students, once they graduated and passed NCLEX, to enroll in a baccalaureate program so that they could continue their study, because the National League for Nursing and the American Association of Nursing, they all did a program. They did an initiative that they said that they wanted nurses to have a baccalaureate degree by 2020. Well, we're in 2020. And so that initiative is still in place to help increase nurses with a baccalaureate degree. And so we wanted to try to aid that initiative by helping these students to transition. So how do we identify minority nurse mentors? Like I said, we attended adjunct nursing teaching at the University of Memphis and Southwest, and we tried to recruit these nurses to come in. We held orientations once we got nurses to participate, to tell them what the program was about and how it was benefiting the profession. We also helped them by telling them that they were helping to transition students or peers, that would be their peers once they pass the NCLEX and will be in the practice area in the hospital. So they were helping to groom and guide these students to be their coworkers in the future. We also made sure that when we got the nurses, the mentors for the program, we had them sign consent forms about the confidential nature of the information that they would receive. We set up mentor training for these mentors so they understood how to engage students, how to ask them questions, how to follow up on them, because students are sometimes very reluctant to tell you if they didn't do good on a test. And the mentors needed that information in order to be able to guide students. And so we went over strategies that they could use to, I guess, probe and encourage students to talk about how they were progressing in the program. We also set up orientation for the students to understand why it was important that they participated in the program, why it was important that they stayed engaged and responded to their mentors in order to aid in their success. And then the last thing we did is once we got the mentors and we had our students, we paired the mentors and the students together. So we had it was a evening session, meal was served, we talked about the program again, we talked about the goals and the outcomes for the program, and then we paired them with their mentor and just for a meet and greet to let them talk and get to know that person, put their eyes on them so they knew who their mentor was. And so that is what we did to aid the students in knowing their mentors. And so here on this slide, we were engaging students in the learning community. And so again, we talked about the population, and we tried, although this was a mentorship program for these minorities, we were not always able to find a representation for each of the minority groups in order to have somebody who maybe, looked like them or came from the same background. But we tried to pair students as best we could in order for them to feel comfortable with their mentor. We had a couple of students who we had to switch out with the mentors, which was okay. And we told them that if they, for any reason, needed to switch their mentor, they just simply needed to let us know, and that will be okay. So we had the students also sign consent form. We did orientation with them. We also did study sessions with the students to help them learn how to time manage, how to effectively study. We had a HERS review that was included with the students who chose to participate in the program. And not only did they have the HERS review for just the NCLEX, they also had study guides that were included in those resources that they could use to study for the test as they went along. And the students found that very helpful. They could go in, they could set up a study plan, they could only look at certain topics that related to a test that was coming up. And so if they followed those programs that were within the HERS review section, it also aided them in being successful. The last thing we did in terms of this program was to have a BSN transition meeting. And this was after all their finals were done, their high stake testing was done, and we talked about their plans to transition into the BSN program. And to be honest with you, some students said they were going to wait a couple of years. Some students said they were just glad to be out of their associate degree program. They couldn't even think that far. But then there were students who asked questions about the BSN program, the FNP program, a doctorate program. So there were some students that had long-term goals, and we found those BSN transition meetings to be very encouraging. Students felt very empowered, and they were able to ask questions of the presenters and others who came on as mentors who may have had a higher degree other than their BSN. And so they were able to ask them those questions. And that really, I think I got all kind of messages about how they really appreciated that and they liked the session and they enjoyed that part of the program. I'm going to stop here to see if we have questions before we move on to Dr. Bowie.
So we had just one question. O'Neill Wright asked if we had any incentives for the students other than food, and that happened to be a big motivator. So whenever we gathered them together, we would feed them, whether that was lunch or dinner. But we didn't provide any other incentives. The review, the study sessions, things like that were things that were programmed into the program, but the students didn't know that that was coming. And I'll detail a little bit about that as I talk.
Okay, here we are, the next slide. All right, Dr. Bowie.
So there we go. I just want to go backwards a little bit. Dr. Dappermont talked about our invitation to students to participate. The way we did that is that we posted an announcement in the senior course for those students. So the announcement went out to everyone. We didn't select, we didn't do sampling, although we had the information and we could have targeted students. We put that out there to everyone. We titled the program a pilot mentoring program for minority nursing students. We outlined the purpose and the goals of the program, and then we listed the inclusion criteria. What I thought was very interesting is that students were able to select to participate. And we didn't take people out. So if you go to the next slide, I want to just bring up something a little interesting about some of the program participants. Dr. Dappermont has already mentioned we had two cohorts. We started fall 19 and we had spring 20. We had a total of 33 students to participate in the mentoring program. 5 of the students identified as white. And I think this is significant because they understood that this was a minority, that it was for minority students. We didn't carve anyone out if they met the inclusion criteria. They were welcome to join. One white male, no one was asked. The white students were not asked why they decided that they wanted to participate. One white male said that he considered himself a minority being a male in nursing. So that's what we had. We had 27 of the participants were Black, 5 is white, as I have previously mentioned, and there was 1 Hispanic student. So when we started looking at the outcomes based on those 3 goals that we had identified for the program, the first metric, the first benchmark was program completion, and that was successful completion of the semester, particularly the capstone course in that semester. We had 2 students who were not successful in the course. We can talk a little bit too about those 2 students because we have some anecdotal data about how they engage with their mentor or their lack of engagement with their mentor. So we had 31 of the 33 students complete the course. That was the first benchmark and that was on track. Now remember, this is a significant piece because the goal of this was to make sure that we saw an increase in success rate for the student participants. These students were identified as at risk by the inclusion criteria, and they felt at risk. They felt very nervous entering the last semester of the program, and they wanted to have some wings to actually help shore them up so they didn't fall by the wayside. This would have been, for all of those participants, their last opportunity in the program. So had they failed the course, they would have been out of the program. So this is not where they want to, this is not the way they wanted to leave the program. So when we look at the other data points, NCLEX completion, Success on the NCLEX, I should say, not completion, but success on the NCLEX for first time testers and transition into BSN programs. The NCLEX data, of course, is still being reported. And I will give this caveat, while we usually see all of this um, by the end of the third quarter, and we have just finished that September 30th, we usually have all of that data wrapped up from our May graduates. But because of COVID, things were slow. They had difficulty getting test dates. That was stretched out a bit. But year to date, well, and I should say, when we put this slide together, we had 15 of the 31 had already completed the NCLEX. 14 of the 15 were successful on the first time. We have 4 students that have shared with us that they've been accepted into BSN programs, and we're really excited about that. One of the things that we know is that we tend to not, students of color will go back to school, but if they take a break, it takes a long time to get started back up. And so what this program hoped to accomplish was to help students make that transition decision earlier versus later. And the mentor would be really key in helping to push that agenda and helping the student to realize the important step that they were completing, what they needed to do in order to actually become fully invested in the profession. Next slide. So what do we learn? And here is the fun part. What do we learn about this? We had the 2 cohorts. We started in the fall. We found that the students shared with us that they found value in the program. They were excited. They liked being connected to their mentors. They thought their mentors they admired their mentors. They found that they were impressed by their mentors, and they liked having someone in practice. And most of our mentors had advanced degrees. So they liked having somebody in practice who understood their story, who could understand how they had transitioned from this level that they are at now to where the mentor was sitting. So that was impressive. The students felt connected to each other, and they were encouraged by each other and their mentors. Nursing, because people in nursing programs generically share the same courses. They are in a generic kind of loosely defined learning community as it is itself. What happened here is that these students became more connected. This small cohort of students, first the fall cohort, then the spring cohort, because we pulled them together, they became more connected, and this learning community then became a source of encouragement. They adopted a kind of a mantra: "We leave no one behind." They wanted to rally around each other. Those were things that we didn't think about, and those were positive outcomes that we were able to realize. So we also learned that designing a learning community must be deliberate and intentional. So the learning activities and the way we pull the students together and the way we pull the students and the mentors together needed to be um, strategic, and it had to be organized around some definitive learning activities so that students understood what the point of the meeting was, that the mentors understood what the point of the meeting was, and that they left feeling like they got more than just a good meal, right? So we use the meal structure, and so sometimes we met in the afternoon, sometimes we met in the evening, but we would have dinner or we would have lunch. It was laid back, it was very relaxed, um, and the students were able to see their mentors in a more of a peer level, but they were also able to connect to each other in a way that was different than just sitting in a classroom with the same folks 2 or 3 days a week. We learned that mentors can be really motivational for what we deemed here as at-risk students, and that we learned that we needed to start this earlier. So we used the last semester in the program And we got this feedback from students. It was something that we thought, but we actually have qualitative data that suggests that students are saying they think this would have been very helpful for them if they had it at the beginning of the program and were able to develop this relationship the entire program. And maybe they would not have failed a course, or maybe they would not have stopped out. So that was something that was very interesting to us. We also learned that we have to look for more resources because we have to continue this kind of engagement and this kind of support. Dr. Lee mentioned uh, there's plenty of research that says in healthcare, when you can go to a provider that looks like you are you feel more cared for. That's number one. But you also feel understood and heard. So you're willing to share information that you might not be willing to share when you go to someone who you don't think really gets you. I'm using this as a generic term. So we want not only to increase the number of minority healthcare providers, the number of Black nurses, we want to increase the outcomes, the health outcomes for the communities that they live in. Um, there's a just to wrap this, there's a very positive impact, a social and economic impact that completing the program provides for our students. And what the mentorship piece does is it actually helps students understand. Now we say this as faculty, as nursing faculty, we say all the time, you have to go back, you have to get your BSN, you have to get your master's degree. We want you to go on that. And they hear it from their faculty all the time, but it just kind of washes over like it's rote. But when they hear it from somebody that they believe cares about them individually outside of the classroom, that they are invested in their success, it takes on a whole different meaning. And so we want those outcomes to increase. I think Dr. Dappermont and Dr. Lee both mentioned that even here in Tennessee, our ratio of minority nurses to white nurses runs around 80-20. So 80% white to 20% minority. And that was like even, I'm sorry, not 20, less than 20. 20 is the entire minority category, and probably about 10% of that is Black. So we want to see all of those outcomes improve.
Right.
Now I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions on this part.
Dr. Bowie and Dr. Deffmont, there was one question from Meredith Cooper, but she thinks that you might have already answered it, but I'll just read it to you again. She said, was there a mentor made available to any student who wanted it, or only to at-risk students?
So only the students who had agreed to participate in the pilot program were matched with a mentor. And I should mention this because this was really a big deal. It's on this slide. But our fall cohort was rather small. People were kind of tentative. They didn't know what to expect. And so we had how you have the early adopters will jump in. So we had a few students. We had, I think, 9 or 10 students. And the spring semester, we were overwhelmed. We had more students than we could actually take in. And that's because the cohort.
Word of mouth.
Yeah.
Word of mouth got out.
It said, you need to do this. This was awesome. I had a great time. I loved it. I got to engage in some activity that I know that I would not have done if I were not a part of the program.
And Sheila, I will just interject on that first cohort. We started with 9 students and one dropped out. And so we ended up with 8 students. But one of the participants was the SGA president, I think.
Yes.
And he was so excited. In that first cohort, they had the Tennessee Nursing Conference. And we were able to take students to that conference. And so the student, Alfred, was a male, and the American Nursing Association president is a male, Dr. Grant, and he got to meet Dr. Grant. And I don't know, it was just for him the most exciting thing. And so he really talked about the program to the incoming students. And so because the cohort was so large, we just had to make sure it was okay so that we can include anybody who wanted to participate. And we had to really work to get mentors, and some mentors had 2 students because we had so many students. But that was a good thing for the program because it spoke volumes of how the students felt about the program and how it inspired them. I also, got messages from students that they are still connected to their mentor. So when they pass the NCLEX, they call it their mentor. Some of the mentors and the students, they go out and have lunch. So it is really a connection that they get. And like Dr. Bowie said, somebody who is invested in making sure they are successful. And for that relationship, the students really, really felt empowered.
So, Dr. Bowie, one thing you mentioned on your last slide was that the designing a learning community has to be intentional and deliberate. And I think that's where O'Neill Wright's question is coming from. So he asks, what were some of the intentional learning topics that we used?
So a couple were professional presence was one. And so the discussion around how do you manage yourself in how do you create this professional demeanor, and how does that translate into walking into your first new job? Our students' age range was anywhere from, I think, 25 to 55, I think. Was that right, Jill? So we had a very wide span.
But diverse. We had a very diverse group.
We had a very diverse age group. So, but just because someone was older does not mean that they had the experience of having that, doing a professional interview and things like that. So that how to navigate your first job, how do you negotiate the discussion around what shifts you work, where do you go, how do you do applications for your baccalaureate program? How do you write this letter? What should that look like? So those were some of the intentional learning topics. How do you focus to study? We did a study group. We did a review, an NCLEX review, of course, but we did a study group that said, how do you now take all of this and filter it down so that it looks like a new nurse walking into practice? And our mentors were very helpful from that standpoint. They talked about balance. They talked about work-life balance. Those were some of the topics that we had for some of those meetings where they shared. One of the mentors was not able to join a session because she was out doing a mountain climb or hike or something, and she did a video presentation to share. And then this was about creating that work-life balance. And so it was really kind of on point. And she says, I wanted to be there, but I had already planned this. And these are some of the things that you have to learn how to do and navigate. These are waters you have to learn how to navigate, especially early in your career. It's okay to say no and take time for yourself.
And I will add also with that, Dr. Bowie, it's also, nursing school can be very intense. Students they still have their life outside of school, but students can get very involved in life outside of school. And when they're sitting in class, they think they're comprehending the information. Oh, I got it. I understood it. It made, it made sense to me. I'll study it later. And so designing a program in which to study daily, small bites, and not wait until the day before the test or the week before the test and starting to cram all this information, that was important, that we taught them how to be strategic in studying as they did life. Mm-hmm. And I think the mentors helped them. They talked about their experiences in nursing school. They talked about, if I had known this, I could have done better. And so the students could relate to it because as Dr. Bowie said, it wasn't just the faculty telling them, you have to do this. It's somebody who's practicing, who they know have completed nursing school, who's still out there practicing, who's given them the ups and downs of practice, of school, and the benefits. And so they're seeing it in different stages. And so they could relate to it. And so I think they didn't see the mentors, I don't want to say a threat, but they didn't see them as they have control over my grade. Whereas your faculty member has control over your grade. This is a person who is like a peer to me that I can relate to, who can tell me, who they probably feel telling them the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I was just at one thing, Dr. Depremont. Our mentors also were very good about not allowing students to wallow in self-pity.
Mm-hmm.
Students were bringing to their mentors and saying that everything is heavy and everything is crazy and I can't do it and you don't know my life. The mentor's response was to be open and warm, listen, and then redirect. They go, okay, I hear you. I understand. I got it. I've been there, done that. And yes, you can. And so that was important too, because sometimes, and I can just share this anecdotally, students will share things and they would say, oh, I just got overwhelmed and nobody gets it, when they're talking to their faculty, because you got, 28 other people waiting in line to come and tell you their story. But this student needs to hear that this is not the impossible. There is a possible path, even with everything else you got going on, right? And our mentors did a really good job of wrapping them up with that.
So I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, to type it in the chat box. Dr. Depremont, no, I helped serve as a consultant because when I left Memphis, I went to South Carolina. So I asked a lot of questions along the way. So I'll ask another question that came up for me that might be helpful for everybody else. So Dr. Depremont, I know you talked about the mentors and how difficult it was. Like you had all these people to volunteer, but then when it actually came down to the rubber hitting the road, you didn't have as many people to actually step up to mentor. Can you share some of their feedback or some of the things that they said prevented them from participating when it got to the final point of mentorship? And what would you say to other individuals who may be asked to mentor students in any area to help guide them in a decision that they might have to make one day?
Okay, that was a whole bunch. All right. So initially, one mentor, she was really excited about mentoring, but then she got accepted into a program and she herself started school. So she was not able to commit fully to being a mentor. I think some of the mentors realized the time commitment, because one of the things in orientation that we told them was that it's a time commitment and that we need you to be engaged, available, following up, because once you commit, the students really, really need you. Even if they are slow to get engaged, we need you to be consistent. And I don't know if some of the mentors thought about it and said, I didn't know, I can't commit that kind of time. I don't know if other things came up, but I only heard from one mentor who said that she had got admitted to school. The other ones just didn't return the email. One mentor said, maybe I'll think about it next time. And so there were different excuses from people who did respond to the email after they had committed. And so, that was one aspect. I would say that it's very important when you're getting mentors that they understand the commitment that they're taking on when they are dealing with students, and that they are fully committed to participating, because you really need them to be all in, because it's for the students' sake. And I think the people who made the commitment and showed up, they were very engaged and they were very committed. As far as the, it was something, I think I'm losing my train of thought. It was something else I was going to say about the mentors. Oh, I had mentors after the program ask me that they wanted to continue to mentor students because they really enjoyed the process. We have not been able to really have the funding and the resources to help, but we're working on trying to get a similar program going. And if it is a smaller program, that is what we may do. But it was so beneficial, I think, for the students.
Dr. Dappermont, I think just to add, as you were talking about mentors and the trouble that you were having, we did have two mentors that we dismissed from the program. One, because she wouldn't engage with the student, and the student was reporting that she couldn't get a call back, and this, and we gave them a lot of flexibility on how they would meet outside of the times that we met together. But this student was feeling lost in the wind, so we dismissed that. We thanked that mentor, and then cut her loose. And then we had another mentor in the next semester. The student reported that she thought his actions were inappropriate, and we agreed because they met at a restaurant. And he wanted to have drinks, like he was on a date, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be leaving," and we promptly dismissed him as well.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Devon, I think you touched on one last thing that I wanted to just highlight. In lieu of not having continued funds for this project and understanding how important it was and how meaningful it was, what thoughts or ideas do you have, or Dr. Bowie, do you have about keeping it or making it sustainable at a smaller scale?
I think the next step is to reach out to the mentors and see how many would like to continue with the mentorship program. So it will be more informal as opposed to the formal grant structure, so that we can still pair students up with those practicing nurses who want to mentor students, because I think even on that scale is helpful. One of the things, and when I did my dissertation, and it was success strategies that successful African American students use to graduate nursing school. One of the things that the students said in that study was that if they could just connect with somebody who was concerned about their success, that was encouraging and empowering for them. So I think if we could just connect people, even if it's not on the formal scale where we're meeting, serving meals, providing HESI, that is a support for them. And some students just need that extra support.
So one of the things that the literature tells us is that minority students, when they get to college, they don't have those skills of learning how to ask for help, right? And so most of them have gotten to their position in college. They've gotten where they are by distancing themselves from other folks, right? Especially those coming straight out of high school. And they were successful, they got into college, but because they got there because they were alone. And we try to tell people that nursing is not a solo sport, right? It is a communal effort. It is a collaborative effort. But teaching students how, in the beginning, how to ask for help, what does that look like, and who can I go to? That's a huge hurdle to overcome. We talked, Dr. Deppermont and I talked about the recommendation from students that we start the program earlier. And so
Right.
one of the things that we had on our docket, and we had identified a trainer. We kind of did the training for the mentors ourselves, but we had identified a person to be the mentor training, to do a mentor training workshop. And that might be something that we can actually do that doesn't require that we can continue, that doesn't require a whole lot of money, that we can sustain. And that is actually taking nurses who are in practice, and maybe they have been in practice 3 years or more or whatever. Here's your opportunity to reach back, right? And put them through this program, and then connect them with students like Dr. Deppermont has already alluded to. But I think that we as faculty, you want to be a mentor, but you're not. You're seen as faculty. And that's okay because the student needs some boundaries and some lines in between. And, we hear student stories, we become counselors, the whole 9 yards. But to have somebody on the outside, and the reason I think training is important is because you don't want your friend or your relative to sabotage you by encouraging you to wallow in your despair. You want somebody to give you a bridge out. And that's what I think our mentors are doing. And I think that we can do some of that. We can sustain some of that kind of relationship, that relational building without having the formal program. But I do think we need some guardrails. We need um, some framework so that mentors know what they're looking for and so that the mentee know what they should expect from the mentor as well.
Right. I like those words you use, that deliberate and intentional.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think what Dr. Bowie was saying, we set up guidelines so that boundaries would not be crossed in the mentor-mentee relationship. And we identified for the mentors as well as the mentee what those boundaries were. And so it's important that you set up those boundaries. So although it is a relationship that's forming, that either party is not crossing the boundaries and the space of the other person in a way that is not appropriate.
Well, thank you. Well, if we don't have any additional questions, and I know the three of us can talk about this all day, we are rounding out the hour. We had about 8 minutes left. So do you guys have anything you want to add before we log off? I'll just say, I think it was an amazing program. The transition meeting, I had an opportunity to join with the students, the excitement, the energy, you could just feel their desire to keep going and to do more. And it does inspire you. When I first got to South Carolina, somebody wrote me a 2-page dissertation about would I be a mentor for a student? And I resoundingly responded with one word: yes. Because it makes a difference when you understand how impactful it is for the students and how you can really change and make a difference in somebody's life. I think this program has definitely demonstrated that it is impactful. It is definitely needed, and we should continue it. So unless you guys have anything extra, I think we can say goodbye.
Yes, thank everybody for coming. We appreciate it. If you have any questions, we will have our information with the conference hosts so that you can reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.